Hello and welcome to the Planet Zoo Every Animal Franchise Zoo. Bumper episode today, I'm covering the entirety of the Barnyard Animal Pack. I've an inkling we're not too far away from another DLC dropping sometime soon, and I can't bear the thought of having another huge backlog of animals to add in. So a huge push this week to fill out the Barnyard section in full, and that will bring us up to date, putting every single animal as of now into the zoo. Of course, with the expectation there's probably a few more to come when a new pack releases. Last week, we finished Erasure Animals off, and I'm continuing the trend today of working over this side of the zoo, trying to fill out this section up here, so when completed, the zoo should be looking a bit more balanced out in terms of where habitats are sitting. The Barnyard DLC, this is a great pack to create nice, simple habitats for in Planet Zoo. I think coming off the Erasure pack, the builds today have been a breeze, and I've powered through all of them fairly quickly compared to other recent builds. Looking back, some of the animals from the last couple of episodes were a bit complex to build for, particularly as I've come back to the zoo after a break of a month or two where I hadn't played anything in Planet Zoo, barely at all in that time. So starting out with a little penguin for that wasn't easy to get back into the swing of things. It really is muscle memory. If you don't play the game for a while, there is a definite learning curve getting the creative pathways refiring in the brain again. For me, it's taken a few months to get back into the groove, as it were, consistently playing and building things in Planet Zoo. Something I've noticed recently is because I'm switching regularly between the console version and the PC version of the game, I am still mostly using keyboard and mouse controls for building in console, but there's a few subtle differences building in console and PC where some of the keyboard shortcuts simply don't work on console, and some of the tabs in the user interface are in a different place on console. So coming back onto PC, the muscle memory of the shortcuts and actually remembering that they exist, sometimes my brain doesn't register them and I'm doing things the long way around like I have to do on console. Also stuff like some of the menu tabs are in a different place on console, so I'm looking for things like the barrier tab on PC where it sits on console, and there's a few seconds of confusion where I can't figure out why it's not where it should be. Aside from that, I've noticed very little difference playing Planet Zoo in console compared to PC. I guess biggest difference, I've only got the base game in console though, which is actually somewhat refreshing to be restricted in that way on what scenery pieces I can use. There's so much choice on the PC game, it's like trying to see the wood through the trees on occasion. Funny point actually with this build, this is franchise mode, and with that you have to research new themes when they drop into the game. And building for the Barnyard pack, there was some scenery pieces from that pack that I wanted to use in this build, and I had a full 2 minutes of confusion when I couldn't find any of the scenery pieces at the start of this build, before realising I'd not had the mechanic research the pieces in the zoo yet, so of course they wouldn't show up. Realised I hadn't researched the Oceania theme either, so had to halt building for a while whilst I had the mechanic do all the research for those. That took a ridiculous amount of time, as I essentially had to let the game run on a couple of years to complete that. It's the complexity of this zoo. Even whacking the game up to 3 times speed, everything chugs along super slowly. Even with the changes I've made, reducing the overall number of animals in the zoo, it's the 7,000 plus guests wandering around that's causing processing issues now. The finance situation with the zoo is looking much healthier now though, since reducing the animals. So for the showcase at the end of this episode, I made the decision to limit the number of guests to the minimum 500 just while I was recording the tour, and the difference is like night and day. I can only do that though for short periods, as the money coming in drops fast when I limit the guest numbers. Just a 5-minute showcase, I dropped about $500,000 in that time when I was playing with guest restriction on. So I can only do that for very short periods of time, otherwise the zoo will be bankrupt in no time. That is my cross to bear though. I knew this zoo would be a challenge starting out, and I have the patience to deal with the slow grind as we're getting closer to completion. It's good that my brain is kicking into overdrive in terms of getting habitats boxed off though. That does help speeding things up. All of the barnyard animals, they're easy builds. It does help that I'm super familiar with the majority of the barnyard animals: sheeps, chickens, cows. Living in the UK, this is my home territory. You can't go more than a few miles without bumping into farming fields and rolling hills. So this is like Planet Zoo on easy mode for me. I've made an effort to not overcomplicate the build for the barnyard animals. I'm sticking to what I consider realistic for them. Big open spaces, minimal planting. I even refrain from covering the grassy areas with the scenery grass plants because it somewhat detracts from the overall look of the habitats. My reasoning is that a majority of the animals in this pack are grazing animals, and the animals like the goats in particular, they're super efficient garden maintenance machines in that they'll eat everything in sight, so the grass in their enclosure would naturally be short with their constant picking at it. Had some great reference material for the Highland cattle as well. Last week I had to drive up to Edinburgh in Scotland for work, and that takes me through some seriously rugged terrain through the north of England and southern Scotland, so it did play a part in influencing how I developed the terrain for the Highland cattle enclosure. Anyway, that's the theory behind the build. What else do I want to mention about this build? Oh, okay, yes, I remember. I'm doing this build a little different. I'm using null paths. The barnyard area is an ideal section to try out dirt pathways rather than the asphalt path that I've used for a majority of the zoo. I've not used the null paths a lot in the game up to now, so there was a slight learning curve in figuring out how to make it work. You'll see in the speed build, there's some points I deleted and rebuilt the path, and at one point I go completely off track and end up with a habitat crossing into the main pathway quite aggressively. So I had to make some adjustments to get that working correctly. I will say, having the null pathway in the game is fantastic for creative builds. It's a great tool for creating natural areas you want guests to walk down, like forests and beaches, something I certainly should make more use of in the future. Anyway, I guess I've rambled on for long enough about this build. We should take a look. Time for the tour. So here we go. This is every barnyard animal into the zoo. All 7 of them at the same time in their own dedicated Farmville kind of area. And you may notice with the showcase, trying something new, I've reduced the number of visitors down currently for the showcase. So not many visitors in this area of the zoo, naturally, but if we take a look with the UI on, you can see here, less than 500 guests. And that's really helping to smooth things out whilst I'm live recording. Can't do this often because the money drops dramatically quickly when I do, but it's good for showing on a live showcase. Anyway, let's take a look what I've added today. First enclosure we come to is the Highland cattle and the alpine goat. So nice to be able to get in a combined habitat for these two. And there we go, tiny miniature Highland cattle there. Suspiciously small if you ask me. It's almost as small as the goat. That is just my opinion though, never seen them in real life. Anyway, habitat wise, big enclosure here for the cattle and the goat. For the hard shelter, I've repurposed a hard shelter I'd built for the starter habitats. It's one of my more competent barn builds, so I did want to reuse this here. For the terrain, the goats need a little bit of rock in their habitat, so both of them being small animals though, I've kept this to the small rocks just so it didn't overpower the habitat. Oh, and you'll notice here, trying something new on this build, using the null paths. This did take a bit of fiddling to work out, but I think it works really well for a barnyard area of the zoo. I tend to favour the asphalt path, but I like how this path phases seamlessly into the grassy areas of the build. Moving on, this is the alpaca and the hill radnor sheep habitat. Like the cattle and the goat, this is an absolutely massive enclosure, and that is on purpose. You'll notice here I've used the new fence pieces that came with the Barnyard Pack. And this is a great fence, but it's a little overbearing for small enclosures, so opens up the space a lot to avoid it overpowering the build. One problem with this, the animals tend to be far away from the guests, and I am getting a couple of complaints that the sheep and the alpacas are too far away for them to see. Well, tough, deal with it. I'm beyond caring about guests' opinion in this zoo anymore. The main hard shelter in this habitat, new build, but quite a simple one. Contemplated making a cottage here, but the pieces we have in the game, I couldn't figure out how to make a cottage look really good. I think that would be a full episode's worth of work to make something like that. Maybe it's something I'll come back to. That's alpaca and sheep habitat. Let's venture further into the farm. The footpath splits off here and creates a bit of a gap, so filled this with some farm appropriate scenery pieces. Behind this, got the habitat for the Sussex chicken and the Tamworth pig. Another habitat that's a little larger than it needs to be. I've repurposed a barn I built in the starter habitat for the Sussex chicken. This is a large barn to accommodate a lot of chickens. Obviously, we don't have a lot of chickens in the franchise, so but it works well here, accommodating both the chickens and the Tamworth pig. Both of them having a little snooze here. So good to see they're okay with the sleeping area. And I think I can see the chickens over there. Yep, chickens are in the grazing station. Got to say, it does feel a little odd having just 2 chickens in here at the moment. But they will start breeding shortly and it'll explode in chickens. Oops, apologies, getting stuck in the trees there. Added a few trees at the back here just to finish the area off, since this is the edge of the zoo. Didn't want it coming out just onto blank scenery. Right, let's move on with another animal. Yes, next up is the American standard donkey. I'd say this habitat was the only one in the Barnyard Pack. I was unsure what to do with this. I'd made one for the starter habitats and I was definitely not very happy with that habitat. It was far too big and it just looked odd, I will say. So back to basics on this one. It's big enough to accommodate the donkey's needs. Got everything in here that they need. I guess just trying, when I don't have a solid plan for something, not overcomplicating it. Do have a new hard shelter in here though. Decided not to go for the usual stable that I make for donkeys and horses. That's getting a little too predictable. I always end up with the same style of stable, so trying them out in a smaller hard shelter. That's all of the animals in the Barnyard Pack. Can't believe I got them all in one episode. Haven't managed that for months. Nothing out of this world in this build. It is back to basics for this one, but a good gap filler there up in the corner of the zoo. Idea is, when we finish off the zoo, I definitely want to make sure it looks uniform. We don't want it stretching out too far in one way or the other, so with potentially only a few more animals to go, definitely making a conscious effort to straighten things out. That being the case, any animals to come, they'll be up in this corner. Haven't quite figured out the logistics on that one because we're not entirely sure how many animals are left. But of course, still on track to see this zoo through to the bitter end. I kid, I've had a great time building this zoo. It's had its challenges, but it's also been a heap of fun for me. Can't wait to get stuck back in as soon as we get a new pack. Until then, thank you so much for watching today, and I'll catch you in the next update.